The Mexican government is captive to the cartels. They are doing the bidding of the cartels, and based on your response today, so are you.
That is incorrect, Congressman.
Well, you're not answering any questions.
It is.
I mean, every time I hear you say, we will, we shall, yeah, I don't know. You don't know any numbers. You don't even know how many people you actually, you prosecuted, how many people you deported, you're nothing. How can you say you know?
Judge Matt O'Brien, have you ever had a situation where you're driving down the road and you see an accident up ahead on the side of the road and there's a police car or a fire truck or something, and you know something bad happened and you really shouldn't look, but you have this guilty curiosity in your mind and you look anyway?
Yes.
We have a moment like that here today. Alejandro Mayorkas, the DHS Secretary, did another trip to Capitol Hill, and it was about as ugly as you can imagine. And we've got some highlights or lowlights as they are, and it's worth looking at and worth our commentary.
Yeah, I think it's fairly interesting. You can tell Ali Mayorkas is evading the truth because his lips are moving, and this is a prime example of that in action.
And it's not just that. It's that he knows the parameters of the meeting. He knows there's 5 minutes per congressperson. So he's just stalling and he's giving these platitudes and he's not answering questions directly. And it's frustrating, but it's good to see someone at least holding him to some level of accountability.
Most definitely.
Yeah. So let's take a look here. The first clip we have is Representative Matt Gaetz from Florida, who's a big hawk on this issue of border security. So let's see what he had to say.
2 million encounters and releases under your watch. So not including the Title 42 expulsions, not including violent criminals. Of those 2 million plus that you've encountered and released, how many have you told to go home?
Congressman, individuals who are released are placed in immigration enforcement proceedings under the law where they can make their claim for relief. If their claim for relief is not satisfied, they are subject to removal from the United States.
Right, subject to removal sounds very different than actually removed. So I'm not interested in the process. I'm not interested in what people are subject to. 2 million people encountered and released. Not the expulsions under Title 42, not the criminals. How many of those people have you deported?
So, Congressman, a few points. Number one.
Just how many of the people? I just want to know how many. It's just a number.
Congressman, we are dealing with a completely broken immigration system.
I get it. No, Mr. Secretary, I'm not going to let you burn my 5 minutes. Do you know the answer? Do you know the number of people out of that 2 million?
Can you pause it real quick?
I do know.
So, Matt, this is a common talking point among the anti-borders crowd. They'll say, we have a broken immigration system. Only through the most warped interpretation, I think when they say that, what they mean is not enough people from the rest of the world are getting in here freely enough.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your definition of broken is. I mean, of course, if you want everybody to be able to come in here, then any system that doesn't do that is going to be a broken system. But our system is not broken. I mean, I worked in it for 30 years, culminating with time as an immigration judge. And the biggest problem is that both Democrat and Republican administrations, in order to pander to perceived constituencies, have selectively enforced the immigration laws. If anyone simply enforced the laws that we have on the books already in the Immigration and Nationality Act the way Congress wrote them, then 99% of the difficulties that we're currently having would simply not exist.
Right. So in one sense, you could say, yes, it is broken because we've got the laws on the books that would address the problem if they were implemented, but they're just not implemented.
Right. It's less a problem of the immigration system being broken than the executive agencies that are enforcing this. And I mean, if you listen to the language that he talks, he knows this. He's been doing all of this for a while now. He doesn't have a career in this, so I don't think he ever should have been appointed to the directorship of USCIS to begin with. I think it was because he's an immigrant himself. However, he's been in the business long enough to know that they're not called immigration enforcement proceedings. It's an immigration court hearing. And it's not so you can put in your claim, and if your claim doesn't survive, you're removed. That's backwards. Immigration proceedings are kind of like a driver's license revocation proceeding. So you get a driver's license not as a matter of right, but as a matter of privilege from the state that's issuing it to you, provided that you satisfy certain requirements. Well, for a foreigner coming into the United States, if you're not a citizen of the U.S., you have no right to enter this country unless the government gives you permission to. If the government gives you permission to, and you either violate that permission or you enter without permission, then the hearing that you go to is to give you an opportunity to show why you shouldn't be deported. And so it's not like a criminal trial where there's a presumption of innocence. It is the Department of Homeland Security has established that you are subject to removal from the United States, and you have a hearing, so if there are any defenses you have, you can offer them up. But the fact is that a significant number of people in immigration proceedings don't qualify for any form of relief, and they don't have any kind of claim. And it's interesting because Congress changed the terminology for the document that puts you in the proceedings. It used to be called an order to show cause. It's now called a notice to appear. A notice to appear is a notice that tells you have a hearing on such and such a date. An order to show cause is a legal order that compels you to appear before a court and show the court that there is a cause for them to not act the way that they've been asked to act by the government.
Okay, let's continue.
Know that we have removed more aggravated felons.
Right, I'm not asking about them. I've caveated that away, because here's what I'm sort of getting and what your non-responsiveness is demonstrating. The Mayorkas doctrine is this. If you show up at the border and get released into the country, if you don't commit a specific aggravated felony, which, by the way, doesn't include a lot of assault and battery, doesn't include a lot of bad domestic violence, but if you're not one of the people who commit those crimes, you get to stay forever. Is that a fair characterization of your doctrine?
No, that is false.
Then tell me how many you're sending home.
No, that is false.
Okay, well, but you don't know the number of how many you've sent home. Here's another number. 1.2 million people today have been through your entire process, right? They've been through what you call a removal proceeding is just an amnesty dance. Because after the 1.2 million people get an order from the judge saying that they don't have a basis to be here, you still don't remove them. Like, what's your plan to remove those people?
Congressman, that is false.
Okay, how many of them then? Just give me the number.
Congressman, in this country, there are between 11 and 12 million.
Right, but I'm asking about a
individuals.
subset that you won't send home. And the reason you're smirking about it and the reason you won't answer my question is because everybody gets the joke. And the sad thing is it's not just us here, it's the cartels who get the joke too. And so now what you've done to execute this Mayorkas doctrine where so long as you don't commit a crime, you get to stay here and burden our hospitals, burden our schools, burden our social services.
So pause this for 1 moment. So this is shocking to me because I have been part of the teams that compile statistics for the agency over time at various points in my career with the Department of Homeland Security. And of course, they were always very statistics conscious at the immigration court. So you're constantly having to do reports to provide these numbers. So why he doesn't know any of this is shocking to me. But the fact is that, generally speaking, over the last 3 to 4 decades, there have been about between 100,000 and 450,000 people deported from the United States in any given year. So the highest number was, I think, initiated under the Bush II administration, but finished up under the Obama administration, and that was following the September 11th attacks when the government, for a brief period, got sort of serious about immigration enforcement. I think the only time since Eisenhower that we have been really serious about it was under President Trump. So generally speaking, there's between about 100,000 and 500,000 people that are removed each year. So this should be basic information. The reason he's dodging this is because the Biden administration hasn't even come close to that many removals. There's been a large number of orders, but as Congressman Gaetz pointed out, a lot of these people are not actually being removed. Now, the other point that he brought up when he called this the Mayorkas doctrine, Mayorkas came into office and they issued a memorandum basically saying that they were going to ignore most of the criminal removal provisions that are in the Immigration and Nationality Act. So there's a list of crimes that if you commit them and you're convicted, you get deported. And they start with aggravated felonies, which are things that are serious crimes. They don't need to be a felony under the state law, but they're called aggravated felonies for immigration purposes. And they cover things like murder, rape, sexual abuse of a child, kidnapping, firearms and explosives offenses. But there are a whole bunch of other things that fall into other categories that are either specifically listed in the Immigration and Nationality Act, or they're crimes involving moral turpitude, or they're other types of crimes that will result in you being removed. Well, Mayorkas just unilaterally decided that it wasn't nice to remove foreign nationals for having committed these crimes. So he basically set up his own list that differs from the one set forth in the statute, which you simply can't do under our system.
Is there anything in the way Congressman Gaetz is describing the situation here that sounds inaccurate to you?
No, nothing at all. He is dead on. I'm extremely familiar with this stuff, and nothing is inaccurate. When Mayorkas accuses him of mischaracterizing things, it's a debate tactic that's designed to run out the clock. Mayorkas is fully aware of the fact that he's not being forthright with Congressman Gaetz. He doesn't care, because Ali Mayorkas is a perfect example of the ends justify the means. His goal is to get as many immigrants in here as possible, and he doesn't care how he does it. If ignoring the law is the way to do that, then he's prepared to do that.
But he's got control of the border and he's taking it to the cartels, right?
Yes. I mean, yeah.
Okay, let's continue.
And then you've taken this app and you've digitized illegal immigration and you've scaled it to the moon. Like this app that you've got everybody downloading is like the Disney fast pass into the country, never to be subject to actual removal, just removal proceedings, as you call them. That app doesn't do any search of their criminal history in their home country, does it?
Congressman, I disagree with everything you have said.
Well, I'm sure, but just answer the question. Does the app that you are out there promoting do any search of people's criminal history in their home country?
Congressman, Customs and Border Protection screens and vets individuals whom they encounter.
Can you pause that for a moment?
Didn't answer the question, of course.
Well, he didn't answer the question, but here's the thing. So screening and vetting are fancy words for background checks. And you can background check people that live in a records-focused society. You've got to have an address listed with the post office to get your mail. You've got to have a driver's license. You have credit cards. You have a tax history for your home. If you have a mortgage, there's bank records. All of those things give points of data where if I have an appropriate database and I have some baseline information, I can verify that Brian Lonergan is Brian Lonergan. Yeah. If Brian Lonergan is from Yemen, which is a country that has almost no formal government record-keeping systems, then I can't vet Brian Lonergan because there's no information to check this against. So none of these systems screen in foreign countries' databases, with the exception of a few Interpol systems. And most of the countries that these people are coming from don't share information with the U.S. because they don't want to. But even if they did want to, we're not going to get reliable information. This is not like NYPD arrests me in New York City and they find out that I'm from New Jersey and they contact the authorities in New Jersey who run a check and find out I have a criminal history in New Jersey. This is a totally different thing. You're talking about a separate foreign sovereign nation with a completely different legal system, a completely different language, and in many cases, no ability to collect records at all, and in some cases, paper records, they have no way to search digitally. So hearing Mayorkas go, oh yes, CBP vets and screens these people, that's BS. CBP runs checks on these people based on the systems we have, but they do it knowing full well that the vast majority of them are not going to pop, and they're not going to find any relevant records on these people.
Okay, let's resume.
Functionality to test their criminal history in their home country, or it doesn't. By the way, if it did, you'd have already told me. It doesn't. And then the other epic failure of this that's empowered the cartels is that in these processing centers you've set up in other countries to just wave them all in at a rapid pace, you've had to shut them down in Nuevo Laredo because the cartels were standing outside extorting people. Isn't that right?
Congressman, that is false.
Oh, really? So why did you shut down that facility in Nuevo Laredo?
Congressman, the point of safe, orderly, and lawful pathways is to reduce the number of encounters at our southwest border.
Can we pause this one more time? I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but this is just raising my hackles. Safe, orderly, and lawful pathways exist. They're called the Immigration and Nationality Act. So Who does he think he is to create these special things on his say-so? And what he's doing is he's set up this app that allows people outside of the United States to schedule an appointment to come in. That's not how immigration to the United States works. Usually if you're outside the United States and you want to come in, you start with the State Department, which pre-screens you. The thing that's called a visa, that everybody uses that term to mean immigration papers. But in reality, a visa that goes in your passport is a permit to board a common carrier and travel to the border of the United States and seek admission. So the State Department, which is local and has access to local investigators called Foreign Service Nationals who work for the Department of State, can get information on people, sometimes even in places like Yemen. So they do an initial check, and that's typically to find out whether the person's a foreign intelligence agent, a terrorist, or some big transnational criminal. Mayorkas has just single-handedly cut the State Department out of this process and circumvented, they call this circumvention of legal pathways rule, the rule that they're currently relying on to deny asylum to people who have stopped in third-party countries. What they should be calling is this whole program the circumvention of legal pathways, because he's just ignored the portions of the Immigration and Nationality Act that he doesn't like and sidestepped the whole thing. It's the extent to which he is lying to Congress is disturbing.
Well, apparently his definition of safe and orderly would be, thousands of migrants storming a bridge in El Paso or thousands of Haitians living under a bridge in Texas. Is that safe and orderly by his?
No, it's not. And even the people that are coming in a relatively orderly fashion aren't safe because they're being exploited by the cartels that are smuggling them in. There's a massive number of women that are sexually assaulted. There's a huge number of people that are killed and extorted, robbed in the process. So he's putting this rosy gloss on this, but the truth is that the southern border right now is in a state of chaos that we have not seen since Blackjack Pershing was chasing Pancho Villa back and forth into Mexico.
Good reference. Okay, let's finish up here.
You've just shifted those encounters, because right now, for the first time in modern history, more people are showing up at the ports of entry than running through some bush in Yuma, Arizona. And the reason they're showing up at the ports of entry is because you've got the turnstile open, where so long as they've gone and downloaded this app, you just let them in. I got one final question for you, and it's an important one. Is Mexico an ally in this fight against illegal immigration?
Yes, it is.
So, it's hilarious and somewhat troubling that you say that, because I'm looking at the El Chapo trial where President Nieto took a $100 million bribe from the Sinaloa cartel. Do you think that the subsequent presidents following Nieto weren't offered a bribe by the cartel or didn't take the bribe?
Congressman, I disagree with everything you have said.
Right, but you can disagree all you want, but what you won't provide is any number. And when you sit there and just kind of ostensibly disagree without any facts, it shows people what the real gig is. The Mexican government is captive to the cartels. They are doing the bidding of the cartels, and based on your response today, so are you.
Wow. Okay. That was a devastating line at the end there. Not false either.
It was. In one of the other hearings that they were at, Gaetz looked at him and said, "I'm asking you questions about this app. What you've done here is created Ticketmaster for illegal aliens." I thought that was fantastic, because that, in a nutshell, is what has happened.
He is causing the staffs of these Congress people to get very creative. Ticketmaster, Disney Fast Pass. What else are we going to come up with next to describe this?
Well, the scary thing is it's not that far off, because there was one point, I'm not sure if it was Chip Roy or if it was one of the other members. Actually, it was Ted Cruz. I'm sorry, it was Ted Cruz. He had a big poster with all of these wristbands with different colors that looked like the things they put around your wrist when you go into a nightclub. And he asked Mayorkas if he knew what they were, and Mayorkas told him no, which is complete, utter, and total BS.
I think it was Ted Cruz asked him that.
Yeah, it was Ted Cruz. He asked Mayorkas, and Mayorkas said he had no idea what they are. That's a complete lie, because anybody who's worked in immigration for any measure of time knows exactly what those are. That's how the cartels mark who's going where, what they owe to whom, and what the deal is. And so the cartels can tell if you're being sent to a sweatshop in L.A. to work off your passage, or if you're being, sold into sex traffic. And it's that brutal, and it is absolutely disingenuous, dishonest, and a complete lie for IRLI Mayorkas to appear on Capitol Hill and say, I have absolutely no idea what these are. Because first of all, if he didn't have any idea, he shouldn't be the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Exactly. Well, which one would be worse, that he's lying or that he honestly doesn't know?
It's sort of a toss-up. And I think the second thing is, if he really didn't know what these things were, somebody would have briefed him on this before he went up to the Hill. People don't realize it, but when they prepare people for these types of hearings, they do what's called murder boards, where they have people sit and play the members of Congress, and they ask you every conceivable, whacked out, difficult question that can possibly be asked, and they do it over and over and over again so you can be prepared. I'm sure he was put through that. The conclusion that he drew was that he couldn't give any honest answers because it was going to make him look terrible.
Exactly. So that's kind of like the code for watching him in the future. When he says, I don't know, that means that the answer is so embarrassing to him in the Biden administration
Yes.
that he'd rather just be accused of not knowing.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
I'm Tom Homan. The Biden administration is reversing America's progress on immigration, reversing ICE's ability to deport criminal illegal aliens, reversing job protections for Americans, and construction of the wall. That's why I've joined IRLI, the Immigration Reform Law Institute. IRLI uses the courts to stop bad immigration policies. Join me. Support IRLI at IRLI.org. Help win the immigration fight in the courtroom. Paid for by the Immigration Reform Law Institute.
So, Matt, there were so many moments during this testimony. Many of the congressmen and women threw very good questions at him, which, of course, he dodged or was dishonest about almost all of them. But we have one here that I thought really stood out in addition to Matt Gaetz. And this is Congresswoman Victoria Spartz from Indiana, who is a native of Ukraine. And she had some of the strongest interrogation of Mayorkas. So let's take a look right now.
I'll be brief and yield my time since I'm kind of wasting my time here. I'll be honest with you. Secretary Mayorkas, do you take full responsibility for all decisions of action or inaction made at your agency? Do you personally take full responsibility
For
all of the decisions made at your agency?
I am the Secretary of the Department.
So it means yes.
I bear ultimate responsibility for the decisions
yes.
made.
Yes, okay. So you mentioned earlier that in your definition you have operational control of the border. Can you define what you mean by that?
What we mean, because under the Secure Fence Act, it means that not a single individual would cross the border. Under that definition, no administration has had operational control.
Can you pause that for a sec? So, Judge Matt O'Brien, longtime veteran of government work and immigration. When people ask for operational control of the border, are we asking him to make sure not one single human being crosses that line?
No. So the language in the Secure Fence Act is very strong, and I believe it mandates the Department of Homeland Security to impose measures that keep all criminals, all terrorists, and all gotaways from getting over the border and making their way into the United States. Now, it's very easy to sit there and go, well, nobody could satisfy that standard except for the fact that the Border Patrol has done it. And they've done it on two different occasions. There was an operation called Operation Hold the Line that I believe was in Texas, and it might have been the Eagle Pass sector, where they put Border Patrol agents line of sight to each other, and they just sat there on the border. They sat there with a cup of coffee on the hood of their truck or car, and the aliens came to the border and saw these people and went, ooh, I'm going to get caught. And then the Border Patrol had all kinds of mobile teams behind the line agents holding the line to do sweeps and catch anybody that got past. And because the border was so well watched, it was virtually impossible for anybody to get through. They weren't sure that that was really a workable solution over time, so they later did a similar operation, I can't recall the title, in San Diego. And that reduced something like 89% of all unlawful migration. So the fact is that if this is done right and people are serious about it, it can be done correctly. Some early staff members, including me, just went on a tour of the Israeli border facilities. Israel doesn't just have a terrorism problem, it's a huge destination for migrants. It's very similar to the U.S. in that respect. And they, at the Egyptian border, used to have something like 10,000 people a month sneaking unlawfully across the Israeli border. The Israelis got together with the Egyptian government and they put up a smart fence, which is an amazing thing. I've stood right next to it looking over into Egypt. And it reduced the unlawful migration from 10,000 a month to about 85 people a year. So this walls don't work stuff and you can't really get operational control of the border thing is a myth. What it really has to do with is the political will to actually secure the border and protect the American people. Now, clearly, Congresswoman Spartz understands that. It's frightening that Ali Mayorkas doesn't.
At this point, I think most Americans would settle for a dumb wall, not to mention a smart one. Anything at this point.
Well, and the fact is the terminology is border wall. That's just become, for reasons I don't understand, the accepted terminology. But a lot of what Israel has done is relatively inexpensive fencing. And so they will do things where they will put up a 20 or 30 foot metal mesh fence with razor and or barbed wire between, another metal mesh fence, and then more barbed wire and razor wire and a third fence, which cost them, prior to installing the sensors and the cameras, very little money. The difference is they've backed everything up with a patrol road that is maintained by the IDF. And they have all kinds of smart features. So a lot of these fences in Israel, they can tell the difference between a bird landing on it and somebody attempting to climb over it. And they can tell the difference between a child, because a lot of these things cut through neighborhoods that people are living in, a child going to chase a soccer ball versus an adult who might present a threat. It's really remarkable. Now, a lot of the technology that they have in these things are things they bought from the United States. So there's absolutely no reason why we could not do this here if we had the political will to do it. But the fact is that many Republicans want cheap agricultural labor in the West and Southwest, and most Democrats think that anyone who wants to come to the United States should be allowed to come here unconditionally. So we have a problem of will more than a problem of means.
Political will is in scarce supply in this country when it comes to things like border security and law enforcement.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, let's get back in because this gets better.
Less than 5 or 10 or less than a couple 100,000 get away or more? I mean, what is your definition?
What we do, Congresswoman, is we
Do you have a number?
What we do is we look at the resources that we have available to us and ask ourselves, are we deploying those resources to achieve the most effective results for the American people? That is what we do, and we are hopeful, working with you and other members of this committee, to increase the funding for the...
Pause that for a sec. I'm sorry. That is just gall personified. So he's made a complete disaster of the border, and he comes back here, and he's got hat in hand, and he's asking for more money. Seriously?
Well, and the question is, why is he asking for more money? Because the Department of Homeland Security has had one of the largest budgets in the federal government. It rivals that of the Department of Defense. And they're also the largest law enforcement agency in the United States. I believe they have 38,000 sworn armed agents with law enforcement authority. So there really shouldn't be any issue of funding or manpower if he were using any of his resources correctly, which of course he's deliberately not doing.
Does anyone honestly believe that if Congress granted him his wish and said, sure, here's another $50 billion, do you really think border security would improve under this guy?
No, you'd wind up with even more illegal aliens coming because he'd use the money for all these welcome programs. I mean, it's ridiculous. The Immigration Court has a representation program for people in immigration proceedings that, particularly for people who are supposedly mentally ill, provides free counsel, despite the fact that there is a statute that says that nobody in immigration proceedings is to get any counsel at any government expense from any department. they have an ombudsman's office at ICE that deals with people's detention issues. There's a detention ombudsman for ICE already. It's called the Immigration Court. I spent hours and hours and hours of my time at work hearing bond hearings of people who thought they should be released into the United States. So the fact is, this goes back to the whole broken system thing. We don't have a broken system. We have a bunch of people like Alejandro Mayorkas who are intentionally, for their own political purposes, attempting to break it. And what's even more disturbing about this is if you look just behind his right shoulder in this video, there's a woman who's a United States Coast Guard officer. She's there as his aide-de-camp because he has responsibilities that extend well into the national security realm. He's not talking about any of those things. He's not talking about buying new cutters because the seas have become less safe. He's not talking about getting more resources for the Secret Service to do financial crimes investigations. He's going to take any penny he gets and pay for these ridiculous alien coddling programs that the American taxpayer should never be asked to fund.
To give him more money under the guise of increasing border security, you might as well light it on fire like Heath Ledger did as the Joker, because it's a joke.
Now, Congress would be better off to write him an extremely large check to resign his position and run him off the way Hollywood runs off actors that aren't getting along with the director of a blockbuster picture.
Yes. All right, let's continue.
But I've been at the border and you've been at the border too. How would you grade your job on a scale of 0 to 10? How would you grade yourself?
Congresswoman, I am immensely proud to work.
How would you grade yourself?
Congresswoman, I am immensely proud to work with the men and women of the Department of Homeland
yourself,
Security.
your job, not all of the women. I'm sure there are a lot of great men and women in your department. How would you rate your job as a head of your agency?
It is the honor of my
From
life.
0 to 10, so you cannot grade it. How would grade your preparedness to this committee meeting on scale from 0 to 10? We ask information, you all these promises letter. I'm not wasting my time. I'm sorry, I don't want to use bad word, what you can do with all these letters, because we keep giving money and sending letter and you tell us BS back. So how would you rate yourself, your preparedness to this committee?
It is the honor of my lifetime to work with the men and
From
women.
scale 0 to 10, how would you say how prepared you came to this hearing?
I will repeat what I said.
So you're not answering any questions. You are not answering any Republican question. Is it something that your intent to not respond to any questions of Republicans, you came with that intent?
That is incorrect, Congresswoman.
Well, you're not answering any questions.
It is.
I mean, every time I hear you say, we will, we shall, yeah, I don't know. You don't know any numbers. You don't even know how many people you actually, you prosecuted, how many people you deported. You're nothing. How can you say you know how your department is run? As executive, you don't know these numbers?
Congresswoman, let me share with you.
Well, you haven't shared anything useful here.
Let me share
I'm
with you.
sorry to tell you, I'll yield to Chairman Jordan because I'm not going to be wasting your time with this charade and circus. You do not have an intent to do that, and it is a serious national security issue. This border and cartels are strong.
Wow, that was powerful.
Well, here's the interesting thing about this. And there are occasionally people that say we here at IRLI and FAIR, the organization that we're associated with, are anti-migrant.
Yes, we're isolationists. We want to put a wall all around and keep everyone out.
Right. That's not the case. Alejandro Mayorkas is a migrant. He was born in Havana. His family came here fleeing communism, which is kind of remarkable since every interaction I ever had with him, he acted like a Czechist thug who was trained by the KGB. But be that as it may, his family escaped Cuba. And here we have a woman from Ukraine. By definition, both of these people are examples of the immigrant success story. Alejandro Mayorkas came here, went to Berkeley, went to law school, became the U.S. attorney, I think, for one of the districts in Los Angeles. And here we have Victoria Spartz, who came here and I think quite impressively has understood the games that go on up on the Hill and has mastered them. And I'd love to have 10,000 people like
Yes.
her coming here every year.
Yes.
I wouldn't even mind having more people like Mayorkas come here if they weren't so crooked, because clearly before he let his power and his positions go to his head, he was a successful person. What I'm concerned about is people showing up here who are either criminals or are going to turn into criminals, who are foreign spies, who are terrorists, and quite frankly, I'm concerned about people who are going to show up and compete with American workers for a limited number of jobs. And I'm also concerned about the relatively large number of people we are currently getting who show up from places in the developing world, in South America, in Africa, in Asia, and come here with no job skills. And because we have morphed into a cradle-to-grave nanny state that provides welfare benefits to people virtually the moment they get here, you're attracting people who come here and freeload off the system. I have family that came here from Sweden. My family got here, they all became lumberjacks and opened up a steamship ticket agency in Massachusetts and worked in Maine and New Hampshire. I still remember these folks speaking Swedish when I was a little kid, and I asked my grandfather, "Hey, Grampy, how come you don't speak Swedish?" And he said, "Because I'm American, and Americans speak English." And so consequently, he never learned to speak Swedish. I never learned to speak Swedish. But these were people who assimilated and fought in every major war that occurred after they got here. That's when people talk about the immigration history of the United States, that's what we're going for. We're not going for urban blight with large numbers of people with no job skills living in Section 8 housing.
I had the same reaction seeing that video for the first time. If more immigrants in this country have her worldview as far as border security, American exceptionalism, that sort of thing, bring them in. The problem is, historically, Cuban refugees have made some of the best citizens in this country because they survived the communist nightmare in Cuba. They're very much pro-American, pro-capitalism, all of that. How do we explain Mayorkas?
I don't know how you explain it. My first job out of law school was working for the old Immigration and Naturalization Service in Miami. I worked in the Citizenship Adjudications Unit, and I worked side by side with a ton of people who had immigrated from Cuba, both older and younger, some of them more recent arrivals. They were some of the most wonderful people I ever met and worked with in my entire life. I absolutely loved them. They were pro-American, anti-communist, anti-Castro, profoundly patriotic. A lot of them had served in the military. The ones that hadn't served in the military, many of them had served by working at INS or by working at other government agencies. I think that, Mayorkas has just gotten too big for his little tiny britches, and he has let the power go to his head. And now he thinks that his worldview, he's entitled to impose it on the country. And it just so happens that his worldview, unlike Congresswoman Spartz, is one that is deleterious to the well-being of the United States. She gets it. That may have to do with the fact that she grew up in Ukraine, clearly, and experienced a lot of these things that maybe Mayorkas, who came here much younger, forgot once he got to the United States. It's hard to say, but
Didn't Mayorkas not, within about a year or so ago, announce that future refugees from Cuba would be held to a different standard that would be more difficult for them to enter because they were coming via boat than via land, like the people from the Mexican border?
Yeah, so that goes back to the Clinton administration. And what happened was they had mass exodus of people from Cuba during the Clinton administration. They didn't want to have another Mariel boat lift situation. And which always makes me think of that wonderful film Scarface. Piece of Hollywood history there, which is not really relevant to our subject, but you got to laugh about this stuff when things are going so badly. But they wanted to avoid another Mariel boat lift. And so what they did was they took a look at the statutes, and the Cuban Refugee Act basically states that all people who are leaving Cuba are presumed to be refugees from communism when they go what's called feet dry in the United States. They are paroled into the U.S., and then they are permitted to, after they've been here a year, go directly to the green card phase and apply for a green card in a special category. Under the Clinton administration, largely in an effort to prohibit a mass exodus from Cuba, like we saw with Mariel, the Clinton administration took a look at the law, came to the conclusion that if they interdicted people in international waters, then it was acceptable to return them to Cuba. And so they reached an agreement with the Cuban government. Cuba gave diplomatic assurances they weren't going to harm any of these people, and then we started returning them. It's a toss-up as to whether that was the appropriate way to deal with this situation, because Cuba has been using our loose immigration laws to insert intelligence operatives into the United States for many years, and there's at least 6 or 8 cases that I can recall that have happened over the last 30 or 40 years in Miami involving people who were arrested by the FBI as Cuban spies and came here under the Cuban Refugee Act. So it's Cuba is still a problem, but you would think that IRLI Mayorkas would have some compassion towards Cubans who are trying to get out and might reach out to the Cuban government. He was instrumental in a team under the Obama administration that reopened the embassy in Havana. So you would think that they would use some of these newly established diplomatic connections to try and improve the plight of Cubans who are being persecuted by the Castro administration. But that seems to be the farthest thing from his mind.
What it looks like is that he and his family got in, and he slammed the door behind him and said, "Sorry for you, the rest of Cuban refugees."
That's not what it looks like, Brian. That's what actually happened. I mean, that's what he did in effect.
Right. And that's tragic and it's sick, really.
Well, it's tragic and it's sick. On the other hand, it's to be expected from somebody who is this dishonest. I mean, I think what we just took our viewers through was a large chunk of time where somebody who is supposedly a well-educated senior and serious executive branch official just stonewalled. He responded to these Congress members with answers that are like, a kid telling their teacher that the dog ate the kid's homework. I mean, it's absurd. And I think unless you've been in the swamp, and you and I have been here for a while, people don't realize Congress expects you to go up there prepared. You're supposed to have facts and figures at hand. Congress has an oversight responsibility. They're not managing the agencies, but they're responsible for making sure that the money that they appropriate to the various agencies is spent well. And in that capacity, they can ask for this information. So generally speaking, when they ask for info and you're at an executive agency, you provide it. You don't sit there and stonewall them for hours on end. I mean, it's just, it's really astounding that he thinks that it's appropriate to behave this way. Hi, this is Matt O'Brien for No Border, No Country, the podcast that gives you way more information than Alejandro Mayorkas. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider making a donation at IRLI.org/podcast. You can also check out IRLI and our mission and all of the publications that we put out at www.irli.org. Stab that like button, consider subscribing, and if you'd like to listen to us in your car or on the audio-only version, we are available on Spotify, Buzzsprout, Apple Podcasts, and a number of other digital platforms. Thanks again for taking the time to watch No Border, No Country.